Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day two of the International Symposium. My name is Mason Rowley, and I am with the Office of International Programs. Today, we have a wonderful session titled In with the Old, Atoms for Peace and Soft Power Diplomacy. Our panel today will be Vincent Paglioni, Assistant Professor of Systems Engineering at Colorado State University, Thomas Johnson, Professor of Health Physics in the Environmental and Radiological Health Sciences Department at CSU, and Scott Bean, Senior Commercial Manager at NuScale Power. Before we get to their session, there's just a few housekeeping items. If anybody needs closed captioning, please turn on that option at the bottom of your screen. There is also a Q&A function on your screen as well, where you can submit questions as we go. We would love to hear from you. And then at the end of the session, you will be asked to complete a feedback questionnaire. We really appreciate if you can all submit your feedback. We do take that into account when we're planning for our next year's symposium, and so we'd love to hear from you. And lastly, these sessions will be recorded and they will be available on our website in the next week or so. So if you miss anything or you want to go back and rewatch, please visit our website at Office of International Programs and we will make these recordings available. With that, I think I've covered all my bases, so I will turn it over to our wonderful presenters. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here and taking us through this session. So, all right, I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mason. And thank you everyone for being here today. Again, I am Vinny Paglioni. I'm an assistant professor of systems engineering here at Colorado State. And I'm joined today by Scott Bean, the senior commercial manager from NuScale Power, and Thomas Johnson, a professor of health physics here at CSU. And we're going to talk about Atoms for Peace, the legacy of our peaceful nuclear energy enterprise in the United States and its role in soft power diplomacy. And I do want to kind of just jump right in, if we can, with kind of what we're doing here, right? And the idea of global nuclear energy leadership and why it's important right now. If you're in our circles, Tom, Scott, and I's circles, right, you are very well aware of the impending nuclear renaissance, but we recognize that we might follow slightly different news lines than other folks who may be outside of the industry. But just briefly, in 2023, at COP28, 25 nations committed to tripling global nuclear energy production by 2050. Six of those nations have limited or no domestic nuclear industry, meaning that they're going to be searching around for international partners. And we want to make the case today that US energy leadership is good for everyone and that the US should be taking a leading role when it comes to developing nuclear energy technology across the world. And this is our attempt to grow and support clean, sustainable development by taking that leading role. But before we continue, I do want to have our panelists introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Scott, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott Bean, Senior Commercial Manager at NuScale. I should add that I'm presenting on my own behalf today and not on behalf of the company, so just keep that in mind. I've been in the nuclear industry and radiation protection industry for a while now. I've worked on both what's called the integral pressurized water reactor technology, which we have at NuScale. So that's considered a Gen 3 reactor technology. And then before that, for many years, I worked on a high temperature gas cooled reactor technology for a company out of South Africa. And then before that, totally different sphere. I was a Russian English interpreter, translator, and editor, both freelance and at companies in Moscow. So that was before my nuclear career. Education, I think it's self-explanatory, touches on a wide variety of topics. So yes, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. And TJ, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tom Johnson. I had a 6 month enlistment in the United States Navy, and I've worked in radiological sciences pretty much ever since then, as well as at nuclear power plants. And I've been a professor here at Colorado State University for 21 years now.
Wow, congratulations and thanks for joining us, TJ and Scott. So I am Vinny Paglioni. I'm an assistant professor here at Colorado State University. My research really focuses on risk, reliability, and resiliency of engineering systems broadly, but particularly nuclear reactors. That is where I kind of grew up in a professional sense. I have a bachelor's in nuclear engineering from Georgia Tech and a couple of years of experience, not in the Navy, but as a civilian, helping to maintain our nuclear submarines. And I now teach nuclear energy courses at CSU at both the undergrad and graduate levels. So let's take a step back and think about where we really started with this idea of atoms for peace. And that brings us back to Dwight Eisenhower in 1953 on the tail end of World War II and our massive rush to develop nuclear technology. He gives this speech to the United Nations talking about the need to remove nuclear energy from the hands of the military and adapt it to what he called the arts of peace, right? And the recognition that that was not a dream of the future, that was a capability that existed then and still exists now. And this offered great propaganda value for the United States. It helped provide some cover for our own nuclear program, both energy and weapons, and it preempted some of the criticism for a growing military industrial complex. But far beyond that, this idea of atoms for peace was sparked out of a genuine goodwill from Eisenhower in an attempt to prevent nuclear war, to actually put nuclear technology to work for the development and betterment of humanity rather than just as weapons. And Eisenhower himself was legitimately concerned by atomic weapons and indeed the military industrial complex, which he actually goes on to kind of rail against before his tenure as president is up. And that Atoms for Peace ethos provided real and lasting value to the world. It really cemented this democratic view of nuclear energy as working for good, and it provided the philosophical basis of the International Atomic Energy Association, or IAEA, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which actually would go on to limit the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And it spurred the development of nuclear energy, again, as a peaceful institution across the world. We started in 1953 with one kind of grid scale reactor in Obninsk, and we've since grown that to 400 or more power reactors around the world. And that's before we even consider the medical isotopes that nuclear energy has provided. 50 million people per year rely on nuclear medicine to some degree. And of course, the ability to conduct cross-cutting research in science, engineering, and the humanities unlocked by nuclear technology. And this comes on the basis of a US-led effort. And you can see in this kind of bottom right figure, the United States, at least at the beginning, is taking a leading role in the export of materials, of technology, and of information. And this not only spurs development, it reinforces the capabilities of our own nuclear industry by providing operating experience and technology improvements that may have taken many more years if we were simply operating domestically and not globally. And this also globalizes the nuclear energy industry writ large. We gain partnerships for things that we need, such as fuel cycle materials and components. And so that is the background here of how we develop this notion of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes through Eisenhower's vision of atoms for peace, and we spur the development of nuclear power around the world. But as you are probably familiar, not all is sunshine and roses all the time. And I will hand it over now to Thomas Johnson to talk about how some of our nuclear accidents have kind of changed the global perspective around nuclear power.
Thank you, Vinny. So there are three accidents that really define the anti-nuclear movement, as well as that had any real impact on the industry, and that would be 3 Mile Island, which is kind of fading in memory, and we'll talk about why just very briefly. The accident at Chernobyl, which really is the definition of a severe accident, and Fukushima Daiichi, which is a real interesting case. And we'll talk about all three of these just very briefly, if we could. The 3 Mile Island accident was in 1979, and certainly from an engineering standpoint, it was a quite severe accident. But from a radiological standpoint, this accident really was quite minor. None of the people off-site received radiation doses in excess of the legal limits. So certainly the fear associated with this was tremendous. However, again, none of the public was exposed to any amount of radiation exceeding legal limits, and none of the workers suffered any injuries, and indeed very few, I think it was very few even exceeded the worker limits at the time, if any. So we had no worker limits exceeded. We have no public limits exceeded. However, there was a lot of psychological effects from this, being one of the first commercial nuclear power accidents that happened in history. So now we skipped Chernobyl, I guess.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Would you like to speak a little bit about Chernobyl?
Just to talk about Chernobyl. Chernobyl, indeed, we do see at Chernobyl for the first time several deaths associated with the accident. So there are radiation injuries. There are members of the public that do exceed public limits, but it's not. So how many people died? That's the key thing. If you look at the work of the United Nations, they say that there are under 60 people died from radiation injuries from Chernobyl. However, the number of people who got excess cancers, you'll see a lot of variable answers as to how many excess cancers and how many people died. Now, no one died directly from radiation off-site. If you look at the data, no members of the public directly suffered from radiation injuries, immediate radiation injuries. However, there's a mixed amount of projected cancers, and you'll see anywhere from a few hundred to hundreds of thousands, depending on the source that you look at. I'm not here to debate that. I'm just here to tell you that certainly we did have some releases here that were in excess of the regulatory limits, and definitely there were people that suffered. However, if we look at Chernobyl today, so what was the environmental impact? Because we do have industrial accidents, and it is unfortunate, and I actually feel very bad for the people who did die from the radiation injuries. But now, how are things today? Is the land completely destroyed? Well, no, actually, Chernobyl and the area around Chernobyl is amazing. The wildlife has come back in a tremendous way. So the environmental impact, certainly it's a high radiation. There's some high radiation areas there, and they still persist. However, the environment has adapted to this in an amazing way. So I would like to, let's move on to Fukushima Daiichi. This is the most recent accident. Now, while Chernobyl was and 3 Mile Island were accidents that can be traced back to some human factors in most cases, Fukushima Daiichi really was not a human factors accident. It was more of a natural disaster that we just didn't anticipate. So we see this huge tsunami, and there are over 20,000 people that died from the tsunami, which is frequently forgotten. We have no deaths from radiation. We have a very limited number. There's disputes on how many people who might have exceeded public limits, but just to tell you that, you would know that the limits were very, very low, and it was a very few people that were if any, were in excess of public limits. Now, there were some deaths caused by the evacuation, and again, the psychological effects from this were tremendous. What is the area like today? I do quite a bit of research in the difficult to return zone. Again, the environment really isn't tremendously affected. However, the long-term psychological effects are huge.
Awesome. Thank you, TJ. And I really appreciate that you brought up the psychological impacts of these accidents because that is really what is driving public perception. And we see kind of across the world, public perception is absolutely critical to our social license to operate. And so, with that said, I do want to turn it over to Scott Bean for some information about where we stand as a global nuclear energy industry today.
All right, thanks, Vinny. Can you go to my first slide? There you go. So just looking at nuclear energy across the world today, so there are 436 reactors operating. This, nonetheless, is still a very small amount of all the global electricity generation that we see, and it's concentrated in a specific number of countries. We in the US have by far the greatest number of reactors. It's about 99 or 100 as of today, spread across nuclear power plants across the country. And then France has roughly 55, 57, and as you'll see just below that, its nuclear makes up the greatest share of its electricity grid by far of any country. And then bring up the rear, you have China, Japan, and Russia. Russia with, I think, 11 plants and roughly 23 reactors. Going down to the nuclear share of the grid, I mentioned France. I think with these other countries, they're concentrated in Europe. And in the case of countries like Hungary, Belgium, that 50% is really indicative of nuclear's density, its energy density, because that 50% comes from one plant. And nuclear plants they will occupy roughly 100 or so acres. So generating half of the country's electricity needs through just 100 acres and one plant is very impressive. And then looking at the reactor designs that are deployed around the world, a few, not maybe as many as people would think. The PWR, pressurized water reactor, is the predominant type of reactor design, both in the US and in other countries. And then that's followed up by the boiling water reactor. They have specific differences between the two designs, but I think the biggest difference, the one to remember, is that the PWR has two loops. So the water is heated in the primary loop through a heat exchanger. The secondary loop water turns into steam and turns a turbine, which generates electricity. While the boiling water reactor, the water that's heated in the core, that's the same water that turns to steam and turns the turbine. So there are advantages and disadvantages in both types of designs. Then going to Russia, they have several types. The VVER, which in Russian just means water electric reactor, signifying that water serves as both the moderator and the coolant. That's the predominant reactor design. And then what I think is very interesting, Russia also has a natrium fast breeder reactor. And so this is, from a technological standpoint, especially just really cool technology. It's able to use uranium-238, which makes up over 99% of the uranium you'll find in the ground. Whereas other reactors, such as the PWR, BWR, they have to use uranium-235 or enriched uranium-235 to just under 5%. And there's only about 0.7% uranium-235 in the Earth's core, so you have to enrich it to get that amount. And it's able to produce uranium-235, the fast breeder reactor, as a fission byproduct. So it's like you're putting firewood in a fire, and as a result, you're getting peat, another type of fuel to use subsequently. And then last but not least, you have the CANDU reactor. It stands for Canadian Deuterium Uranium Reactor. Its main difference is that, as opposed to all the others I talked about, except for the fast breeder, which are light water reactors, essentially the type of water you'd find anywhere, as a drinking source, the CANDU uses heavy water, which also presents advantages and disadvantages. Next slide, please. Then looking to tomorrow, there are 75 reactors under construction, predominantly in Asia. In the US right now, there's nothing going on with respect to actual on-site construction, maybe for the exception of, say, the TerraPower reactor prototype that's being built in Wyoming. And then outside of China, you see India, Turkey, Egypt, and South Korea. What's important to note with India, Turkey, and Egypt is that you have either all those plants, such as Turkey and Egypt, or some of those plants, such as in India, are being built by Rosatom, the Russian state-owned nuclear company. So they have a very big footprint across the globe in nuclear power plants construction. And then for small modular reactors, ENTRA1, they are NuScale's project development partner. They have a deal with the Tennessee Valley Authority to build up to 6 gigawatts of small modular reactor power. So that translates to 6 plants using NuScale technology. RoPower is a Romanian government company that's building one plant based on NuScale's technology. And then OPG, Ontario Power Generation in Ontario, Canada, is looking to build up to 4 of GE Vernova's boiling water reactor, small modular reactor design. So all those reactors I just mentioned, they are Generation 3/Generation 3 Plus designs. Then when you get into Generation 4, you still see these at the development stage. None are at the actual commercial construction phase. You have the high temperature gas reactor, molten salt, liquid metal. So the main differentiating factor here is that they use different types of fuel and coolant types. So the HTGR, often they'll be based on what's called pebble bed fuel. So they're essentially pool balls, size of pool ball, little pebbles that have bits of uranium inside them. And then it uses, instead of water for coolant, it uses helium gas. So this, is all in our perspective for sustainable growth and essentially providing the best of both worlds, good economic development and being very environmentally sustainable.
Excellent. And so with that context of kind of the reactors that we're seeing today and what we're forecasting for the near future, right, I want to turn our attention back to the globalization of this industry and the US needing to take a leading role. And so I'm wondering if you could follow this up with some discussion of our roadblocks to our global leadership.
Sure. So, and I see this almost on a daily basis in my work. There are specific, say, pillars, roadblocks to democratizing the nuclear technology across the globe. These 4 points, I wouldn't say they're in order of importance or prevalence, but I see them all as playing a big role. Country by country licensing. So, for example, NuScale, we have a reactor design, a plant design that's been approved and certified by the NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, for construction and operation in the US. It's the only SMR design to have those approvals and licenses or certifications, and that's great. And it makes us a near-term deployable option for the US. But that doesn't mean we can go into, say, Canada or any other country and have the same approvals and certifications. While we can reference a native country certification, you still have to go through the certification process of whatever country you're looking to operate in. So that constitutes a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort. And so the lack of having a harmonized regulatory framework across countries really slows down the process of democratizing US nuclear technology. Also with regulations. So a lot of the regulations today, they're based on light water reactor technology, and it's been a while since they've been updated. And so they don't really take into account the innovations that have happened in nuclear over recent decades. So NuScale, in getting our certification, Even though we are a pressurized water reactor design, in other words, LWR, because we rely on 100% passive safety systems, we had to apply for and receive some 17 exemptions to NRC regulations. So we had to apply for them, demonstrate why these regulations didn't apply, and essentially convince the NRC that we are exempt from those regulations. So even with, say, Gen 3 plus designs, it's no small feat to get licensed in today's regulatory framework. And this goes not only for the US, for especially European countries where we've been told that without updating their regulations, there's no way you would be able to certify your design in our country. Also, not to be understated, the competition. So Russia and China, I'd say especially Russia, they are able to go into especially new to nuclear countries and offer stuff that the US just cannot offer. I mentioned Rosatom, the Russian state-owned nuclear company. They are able to provide not only the entire fuel cycle, so they mine the uranium, they enrich it, turn it into fuel, they build the plant, provide all the reactor technology, decommission it, and reprocess the fuel. They do everything. But not only do they do that, they also can do it all at extremely advantageous financing rates, complete project development models, and they can build all the infrastructure around the plant. So if you're a new to nuclear company, you don't have much money, and you get an offer like that, it's very hard to compete with. And we see that especially in Southeast Asian countries, Mideast countries, and Africa. And also the risk aversion. This is, you see this almost every day. No matter how much a company and industry states how they want to be green, they're all for nuclear, they really care most about risk mitigation and what project development model is open to them. How much risk will they actually have to shoulder? And so we need more project developers that are capable of shouldering, especially the upfront risks, so all the capital expenditures. Nuclear involves a lot of them, and has given it a reputation of being untenable economically. So we need more project developers who are able to do that, and the ones that are able to do that, they will do it with designs that have been in operation for a long time or have the necessary certifications. And there aren't that many of those, so we need more of those designs as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And I think it's good to end on that kind of risk aversion piece. That is something we hear from every stakeholder in nuclear energy, even in the United States, that even big utilities are saying that they didn't want to be the first to pull the trigger on a small modular reactor because that's a lot of capital expenditures up front that they're just not convinced will pay off in the long term. So I really appreciate that context and information, Scott. And I want to turn it over to TJ now, who I think can add to this discussion. So beyond being able to share technologies between countries as we're leading nuclear energy development, we also can share information and knowledge. And so I'd like for you to take a couple minutes and talk to us about knowledge transfer with this globalized nuclear energy industry.
Yeah, one of the key places for knowledge transfer has been the International Atomic Energy Agency, but at the same time, I still think that the United States leads in the safety culture, and this is something that was started as an outgrowth of the response to the accident at 3 Mile Island. Although, as I said, the radiation doses were very low to everyone. There was no one who exceeded limits. The industry took this as a cautionary tale and spent a lot of money and effort to initiate a safety culture where everyone tries to work in the safest way possible. You have a questioning attitude, and this has paid off. If you look at the list of safest industries in the United States today, nuclear is typically number 2 or number 3 is a safe industry, safer than almost any other industry, including many office jobs. And this is something that is not typically offered. We don't typically look to Chinese or Russian-backed state agencies as a safety culture. And hopefully this would be adopted no matter where a reactor is built and no matter who builds a reactor. But I believe that the United States is the leader in this area.
Excellent. Thank you, TJ. And I think you hit the nail on the head with that safety culture idea that has really been fostered in the United States since Three Mile Island and really since before that. But Three Mile Island, as you said, is really what woke the industry up to the need for some robust safety insurance approaches like probabilistic risk assessment that has since become a standard not only through the nuclear industry, but through other of these high consequence, low probability industries, which poses different challenges for risk perception that I can talk to in any number of 3 hour long lectures for my class. But I think that we should probably just keep moving since we only have about 30 or so minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have ample time for questions and discussion. So to round this out, I think what we've heard from both TJ and Scott is a really broad-based view of what the U.S. nuclear energy industry offers to a global enterprise, which is that safe and reliable nuclear energy reliant on a safety culture that has become the gold standard of safety regulations across the world that can support sustainable development. So for countries that are interested in expanding their electrification approaches and shoring up the reliability of their grid, nuclear power is a fantastic resource to do that. And we're doing so in this context of a democratic vision of energy, right? Really supporting development and bringing countries up alongside their industries. At the same time, as we do this, the US gains operating experience with designs that we also build and operate in the United States. We're able to share experience and knowledge for that mutual development. And this spurs the growth of an industry, of multiple industries here in the US. And that is not just engineers or scientists, that is across disciplines and skill levels, trades, technical vocations, and business roles as well. And I think it's also important to note at this point that something we haven't necessarily talked about that the US really desperately needs is global partnership for their nuclear fuel cycle. Right now, domestically, we produce something like less than 1% of the total need of our uranium fuel from fresh uranium reserves, right? From mined or leached uranium. So we need global partners who have higher uranium reserves in order to meet our demands. All right, and I want to end before we get to questions and broader discussion with some final thoughts on nuclear in the news. We've talked about that idea of tripling nuclear power by 2050. The Trump administration has one-upped that to try and quadruple nuclear power in the United States by 2050 on the basis of enhanced support for the industry generally and specific and targeted programs like the DOE's reactor pilot program. Whether we triple or quadruple nuclear energy is somewhat immaterial to the broader point, which is we are going to need many more nuclear professionals around the world. The IAEA is projecting something like 4 million new professionals needed worldwide, and I was told that there were about 44 folks on the call today. So there's plenty of opportunities out there for you in the nuclear energy industry, and this is again for all stripes, not just scientists and engineers. And I want to also note being competitive in the industry does not require a nuclear engineering degree. Lastly, for nuclear news, if you are in Colorado, I would encourage you to talk to your state lawmaker about Senate Bill 2645, which would establish some support for nuclear energy workforce development and education in the state, right? The whole purpose of this talk and kind of what Scott, TJ, and I believe about nuclear energy is that it's supposed to work for everyone, and that includes Coloradans. So I would encourage you, whether you are for or against nuclear energy, make your voice heard as part of your democracy. And lastly, if you would like more nuclear energy resources, I believe we can post the slides. And you have links here to plenty of resources that are accessible to all levels, from Nuclear Energy Institute, Idaho National Lab, American Nuclear Society, the Colorado Nuclear Alliance, and Nuclear Works. So with that, thank you all very much. Thank you, TJ and Scott, for your amazing insights into this industry, and thank you, Mason, for facilitating this.
Of course, thank you all. We really appreciate your time in this presentation. I found it very fascinating. And you were right, we do have a lot of questions from the audience. I think this
Excellent.
topic is front of mind for a lot of folks. Some who work in this industry, and then others who are who don't have any clue at all. So let's get started. One of the first questions that came in, so that's a heavy hitter for today. So can the panel speak to the current war in Iran with one of the rationales centered on concerns regarding development of nuclear weapon in Iran? What are the panel's thoughts on this tension between advancing peace and energy in today's geopolitical context?
Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite the question. Yeah, we were talking before this, and I mentioned to someone that, with the events of the past weekend, I'm sure a lot of us speaking at the International Symposium have had to kind of quickly go in and do some rewrites to our slides.
And I
So
can rephrase that in a different way too, if you'd like. We have another
yes,
question
yeah, I
along
think
the same lines.
because I can't actually see the
Sure.
question. So if you wouldn't mind rephrasing that, that would be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yes. So to put it a little different, well, along the same lines, how do we reconcile nuclear energy development with proliferation concerns under the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons?
I can start. So we have, at least from the U.S. perspective, we have safeguards. We have a very strict federal legislation on how we share our nuclear technology with other countries. We have to sign what's called a 123 agreement in order to be able to engage with any country on civilian nuclear energy. And being able to sign a 123 agreement, which is a reference to a clause in the Atomic Energy Act, a country has to ensure, and we have to be convinced that they are able to follow, for example, non-proliferation laws. They will not take on the enrichment of uranium to the necessary percentage of uranium-235 to create a bomb. So just for context, today in the US, enrichment of uranium-235 isotope is, again, under 5%. But to get to a bomb, you need to get to something like 90%. And to get to that 90%, it takes an insane amount of time, effort, cost. So you can have civilian peaceful usage of nuclear energy without having the risk of a country trying to create a bomb.
Great.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
that was a fantastic answer. I think that covers most of it in the interest of kind of moving on to
Yeah.
all
Can I answer it in a simple way possible? Just because you
questions.
have a reactor does not mean you can make a bomb. The only way you can make a bomb using a reactor is to operate the reactor really wrong.
Noted. Okay. Thank you for that. And I think
And when I say really wrong, I mean you can't make it explode. I mean, you can make stuff that you could use to maybe make a bomb, but it's really, you really can't. Any reactor, the fuel from a reactor, it's any commercial reactor that's out there, you really can't make it into a bomb.
sure.
You really can't.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I think those questions get at the heart of a big problem that you all mentioned here is about a lack of trust from just everyday persons in society about how this would function on a day-to-day in their communities, what impact they would see. You also spoke of sustainability concerns, and there was a question that popped up in the chat too about solar energy and too. And there's a lot of forms of renewable energy too. And I think that we all have to acknowledge that there's trade-offs of any energy creation we pursue. And so, how do we have an honest conversation about judging those energy systems, what the byproducts are, and what we're going to pursue moving forward? And also along those lines of how do we build trust within our society about those realities? Um, and I just wanted to also go back, TJ, to your slides. You and I have had several conversations about this in the past, with nobody knows how reactive Colorado is, parts of Colorado. And so I think going back to that trust piece, I think the perception of nuclear energy is oftentimes rooted in these larger disasters, when in reality, we are exposed to different radiation levels in our day to day that have nothing to do with nuclear energy. And so I think there's value in introducing that into the conversation, to really put the dangers and also the rewards of pursuing these energy models into perspective.
Yeah,
Actually,
I wholeheartedly agree.
yeah.
Sorry, Vinny.
No, that's all right. I want to drill into the trust piece because I think you hit on something that's really fundamental in risk perception generally, that doesn't necessarily apply only to nuclear power, but one of the biggest factors in your perception of risk is your understanding of a technology.
Hmm.
And that also weighs heavily on your trust of the technology itself, right? We all go to a doctor and get x-rays and get massive doses of radiation in some cases because we trust our doctor, right? We
Mm.
see the doctor regularly. We think we know how x-ray machines work, but you might be surprised. But we don't necessarily have that same familiarity with nuclear energy. And
Hmm.
that's where events like this are really, really important. And one of the things I try to instill through my classes is you don't need to be a PhD level expert in nuclear engineering to gain at
Hmm.
least an appreciation for the technology to make an informed decision.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I love that. And I think going back to the Colorado piece too, as far as TJ has told me several times, like we have students from Japan who come here for short-term visits in the summer. They go up to Rocky Mountain National Park and take radiation readings, and oftentimes Rocky Mountain National Park, or every time they take this reading, it's more reactive than Fukushima currently is. And so it's not to discount the safety concerns that people have about nuclear reactors. But it's just to put it all into perspective, I think, in that we need to be honest about all of these elements when we choose how we move forward as a society. Um, yeah. All right, we have some other questions that have come in. Is there any development of potentially safer, in parentheses, accelerator-driven systems?
I think that's getting at fusion power, which absolutely there are developments along fusion power. There are developments with improving fusion power and bringing it to commercialization here in Colorado and here at Colorado State University. We have the Atlas partnership with Marvel Energy, a fusion startup or a fusion company from Germany, developing laser confinement fusion systems. And there's also Excimer Fusion, or I can't remember the exact company name, but Excimer, based in
Yeah, that's
Colorado,
right.
developing similar laser-driven fusion systems. So there are improvements along in fusion as an energy system. The problem is that right now the best energy output to input ratio that we're able to achieve is about 4, right? So we're getting 4 times the energy out that we put into driving this system. And that's using the National Ignition Facility with the full might of the US government and its research apparatus behind it. We think at this point to achieve realistic commercialization, that ratio needs to be about 10. And that needs to be achieved without it being at the National Ignition Facility. So there's a ways to go with fusion, but it is certainly developing.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
We have another couple questions. The person writes, first of all, excellent presentation, especially for the non-experts that we have attending. So thank you for providing all the additional context. They have 2 questions. So first, they think that Germany was a leader for developing pebble bed gas-cooled high-temperature reactors 40 years ago. Is Germany developing any new nuclear technologies, including HTRs? And the second question is, are there any restrictions or sanctions on the Russian company developing 2 new nuclear reactors, and do you trust their safety concerns?
I can start. So yes, you're right. Germany was the essentially the pioneer in HTR technology. South Africa then picked up, I guess, where Germany left off in the very early 2000s and had a government backed initiative to build pebble bed HTR plants across the country, but that folded, and that's actually where the company I worked with picked up on that technology. So with respect to new technologies, I don't think so. Germany is only now just realizing what a big mistake it was to decommission the reactors. I actually have a colleague who worked for many years at a German plant, and he said there were no nuclear plants in the world that were safer and cleaner than German nuclear plants. So it was an entirely ideological decision and poor decision to decommission their entire nuclear reactor program. Russian, so the Russian nuclear industry has many sanctions on them, and we, as in the American nuclear industry, are prohibited from working with directly with Russian entities or also Belarusian entities, but also companies that have direct ties to those entities. So from a political standpoint, it's we can't work with them. From any standpoint, we can't work with them. I don't have any reservations about the worthiness of their technology, the safety features of their technology. It's very good technology, very tried and true. Even the RBMK design was notoriously known for being the design at Chernobyl, but the improvements they've made to that design and to the human factors with that design are such that a second Chernobyl is not going to happen. So technology, I have no problem with Russia.
Okay, thank you for that. I wanted to just go back to your Vinny, basically how you were saying that there's going to be a huge demand for folks working in this sector. And I was wondering if for all of the students and people maybe who are looking to change careers, maybe who are not, early career individuals who are, so basically the entire spectrum, like what are a lot of the ways folks can pivot and maybe get involved and look at just different educational opportunities and trade opportunities and things like that.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. So thank you, Mason. So yeah, we are expecting at this point, right, a lot of new opportunities in nuclear power. But I do want to be a little bit sanguine and say that this is kind of a chicken and egg situation of we need people to build the nuclear power plants, but we also kind of need to show people that this opportunity exists. That said, there are really good opportunities for students all the way up to seasoned career professionals. The The startup game in nuclear energy right now is pretty strong. I see every day, it seems like a new company is founded to innovate somewhere within the nuclear energy pipeline, whether that's on the fuel cycle, on reactor design, on decommissioning, on
Mm,
operations and maintenance. So there are plenty of opportunities kind of across your experience levels. I would say the best way to get involved is if you're a student. Let's start with kind of if you're a student,
mhm.
come take my class. It's awesome, and you'll get to hear more of this. It's
Good plug.
but get all that to say, right? Get acquainted with kind of the fundamentals of what nuclear energy really is.
Hmm.
I do want to make it known and kind of emphasize you don't need a nuclear engineering degree. And I had this conversation with Scott and TJ the other day that I actually recommend not getting a nuclear engineering degree unless you want to go for that reactor designer, core designer role.
Okay.
But you can do a lot with any other engineering degree or physics, chemistry, biology, health physics is huge. And you can really impact the industry that way. Beyond that, we are really going to need trades of all stripes. Construction is the kind of roadblock that we're seeing right now for
Hmm.
nuclear energy build out. We need folks who are willing, able, and understand how to safely and efficiently build a nuclear power plant. If you are a kind of mid or late career professional or you're interested in kind of changing over your approach, I'd say that the first step is still the same. Familiarize yourself with the basics of nuclear energy, understand what the industry has to offer. These resources, I think, are particularly accessible for folks who are interested in that. And Nuclear Works down here actually has really good career advice for folks who are interested in changing into the nuclear energy industry. So, my bottom line is familiarize yourself with the industry, with the technology, and then let's see where you can make an impact in the industry.
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. We had another question come in. And it says the technology for new nuclear reactors has made dramatic steps and improvements. What about the technology for nuclear waste storage? Have we made major improvements for that? And what is the situation for nuclear waste storage in the US? I think that's a big concern that people have in building these systems within our communities. And so I'm curious myself to hear your answer.
I can start. So in short, don't be concerned.
Perfect.
If any industry is overregulated, it's the nuclear industry.
Okay.
And the nuclear industry is very good at dealing with, I think what people think of waste is actually it's spent nuclear fuel. And just keep in mind that over 95% of that spent fuel is still good fuel. It can be used
Mm.
again. You just need to
Okay.
reprocess it, purify it of the fission products that make it no longer good for use in the current fuel cycle that it was taken out for. So we do have legislation, excuse me, to eventually create a deep geological repository. Unfortunately, even though it's been uh, frankly even overfunded by the utilities that operate nuclear power plants, for political reasons, it hasn't been commissioned. I'm not sure at what stage it's at right now, but Yucca Mountain was at least determined to be an appropriate site to store spent nuclear fuel deep and underground. But again, for political reasons, it hasn't come to fruition. So currently, what utilities do is once the fuel has cooled enough in the cooling pool, spent fuel pool, which takes about 5 years, give or take. This fuel is then spent fuel is put into dry casks for just air-cooled storage, and those dry casks are stored on the territory of the plants in sufficiently guarded areas, and they take up very little space. For example, NuScale's standard plant design It requires just an acre of space to store 60 years worth, the entire plant's life cycle of spent nuclear fuel.
Did you say
So
60 or 6 years?
60.
60. Wow. Okay. Great.
So while on-site storage, it's still seen as a temporary solution. Temporary means decades, and it's totally air-cooled, no powered mechanisms to provide cooling for that spent fuel. It's still a very tried and true, safe solution.
I actually want to follow up on Scott's point there because he's exactly right. It is no cause for alarm, no reason to be concerned with the current state in which we store spent nuclear fuel. But I actually think that I can connect that discussion around Yucca Mountain and what the DOE is doing right now to another question I saw in the Q&A about, this isn't, someone made the point, this isn't about trusting technology, it's about not trusting incentivized systems. And nuclear energy, we can't run from a less than perfect history, to put it lightly, with community engagement, and Yucca Mountain is certainly part of that. But after Yucca Mountain was canceled in the late 2000s, early 2010s, we realized that now we have no long-term solution, and the DOE is currently working to rectify that with what they're calling a consent-based approach to siting spent nuclear fuel, at least an interim approach. So they're working with communities to show them the benefits of hosting a federal storage facility for spent nuclear fuel, and saying, hey, imagine the impact of federal dollars on your community. That's a much better approach, not only to storing spent nuclear fuel in an ethical manner, but also in building that trust with communities that we desperately need to maintain our social license. So yeah, there's no cause for alarm. And I actually think that we are on the path to doing this a lot better than we tried to in the past.
Yeah, that's reassuring to hear. We're running out of time, but I do think one last question that we got in was about the implications and risks for aquifers and water supply with deep storage. You mentioned the air-cooled option, but here in Colorado, especially with such a dry winter, I think a lot of people are very concerned with what our drinking water situation is going to be like moving forward. So if you could maybe spend just 30 seconds to a minute answering that last question, I'd appreciate it.
I think the best way to start that is when we talk about deep geologic storage, it is, and I don't mean to be pithy, it's more than dumping this into a hole.
Okay.
So these are heavily and rigorously engineered storage solutions that would be very deep into bedrock and into stable formations of Earth, because the idea around deep geologic storage is to sequester this waste for thousands or tens of thousands of years. And so at the very least, it has to remain stable for that amount of time. And there are various methods of doing this, whether you are securing those dry casks themselves or kind of like vitrifying the waste into a new format to store it. But broadly speaking, there are very, very minimal implications, if any, for aquifers and water supplies.
Yeah, if you look at the geologic storage, like here, the Fox Hills Aquifer could be anywhere between 300 and 600 feet, and these storage facilities are going to be much deeper than that. So the aquifer would be far, far above where this would be.
Okay. Interesting.
And then to further answer that question, apply it to the operations of a plant. So a lot of people ask about where the water implications, the consumption of a plant. Nuclear plants can use what's called air-cooled condensers. And at least in the case with our reactor design, that decreases the overall water consumption of the plant by some 97, 98%. So the water consumption for the operations of a plant, and in particularly with NuScale, our consumption is very, very low, almost non-existent.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you all so much. We have about 1 minute left, and so I just want to give you a round of applause for our audience. I know you can't hear or see them, but we are all very grateful for your time. Um, for all of our attendees, we do have a couple of sessions left. Up next, we have our keynote speaker, Jeremy Konyndyk, President of Refugees International. That is happening at 12 p.m. And then we have another session this afternoon at 1:30, titled When People Move, AI Tools and Systems Thinking for Understanding Human Migration. So again, thank you all very much. And to our attendees, we hope to see you at our next session. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
You too. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.